Okay, so I am here with Zach today. We are going to talk about his experience in pushing the performance boundaries of a couple of his elite athletes, primarily and in the context of evidence-based practice. And that Zach, you've done a great job throughout all your coaching of using kind of science as it comes out and as it gets validated and immediately transferring that into your coaching practice to have what I'm going to say, just knowing you and knowing your athletes a little bit, I would call like immediate, nearly immediate, but also really very excellent outcomes from your athletes. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk today. Um, can you start by walking us through kind of how that's worked for you in the past and even like why you've decided to do it so soon as opposed to waiting for 2 years from now when a publication, a magazine might have something about like, look at all these things that coaches are doing, and then you jump on the bandwagon there.
Yeah, I think that I've been racing bikes since I was 12, right? So you directed and was on Mercy cycling with me when I was early 20, just turned 20 basically. And I think that we've been doing this sort of thing as far as using evidence that exists, but then also trying things out practically in races for ourselves to see if things actually work or what's a gimmick. So there's a bunch of different filters sort of that I use to see if something works. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, we knew there were studies on bicarb, for example. So like this whole podcast probably isn't going to be about biohacks or ergogenic aids specifically.
Yeah.
What is an ergogenic? Are carbs an ergogenic aid? Like, what do you actually, what's the lines blurred between nutrition and ergogenic aids? But, um, 2010, 11, 12, we're putting scoops of baking soda in our bottles, right? And lining up for Gateway Cup and seeing if we shit our pants or buffer acid better, right? So, the first step I think is the evidence for, again, back to the bicarbonate example, the evidence for bicarbonate in buffering acid and increasing your time to exhaustion and ability to buffer acid has been around for decades. And so it's interesting the different waves that come after that, whether it's like the Martin bicarb mix, where you mix in a bowl of, you know, gel cereal that's heavily bicarb that hopefully has less gastric distress for you. Um, these things kind of come in waves, but the evidence started out a long time ago. So I think looking at the research as it comes out is key to understanding the fundamentals of why something would work. And then once this is physiology and exercise science as well. Like once you sort of, if you have a degree, it makes things a lot easier to sift through fundamentally consuming a like massive amount of basic molecules into your gut will create an acid gradient where you can buffer acid better. So like fundamentally with that degree and research, I feel like I have a better filter to understand if fundamentally something should work and then trying it on yourself. And then, especially if you have athletes that are looking for that edge at all times, then sort of working with athletes to try things out and seeing if things work. And you don't have to be an elite athlete to do that. Like your threshold, if you're a 6-year-old athlete, is this. And then there's something that fundamentally sounds like it would work, and research kind of backs it up in something like bicarbonate, or the current high carbohydrate intake and high output in gravel racing specifically. So then you try it out, and then that's where you sort of get to the cutting edge, or in some cases ahead of research and universities' ability to test those things on people.
Right. And even looking at that high carb concept, even knowing you have to do it, like knowing what the output is or the outcome is not the same as also knowing how to get to that point. And that's something the studies the studies tell you like this is a thing that we've seen in the lab, but they don't tell you practically the process of how to execute that in a competition. And That's what I found really interesting and almost intriguing, like just watching you and your work with some of these elite athletes, and how they have have kind of, I'm going to say, like led the pack, but I don't know if that's the right phrase. But they were some of the first, if not, and still doing it to a very high success rate, but also very high like refined process, and how they're able to do that. Like they know, the outcome, and you know that it should be a thing, but then you have to develop that process of teaching the athletes how to do it in competition. Um, how do you get to that point, and how do you develop that? And then also, how do you get the clients to like buy into it too?
I think that it's been easier when the tippy top of the sport is like a little bit ahead of research, and you want to try something that maybe someone else has been doing for a while, and it goes across. It's just early adoption effectively. That, the term early adoption can be defined across industries, or anything in sport especially. And then you get into from early adoption into like minimal gains and all these other like just like vague terms that people throw out there. But everything from equipment to nutrition, crank length, wider tires, like all this stuff, I think you have to look at stuff as an early adopter, right?
Right.
And it started for me personally at the very beginning of my racing career, and it starts by trying something out, that fundamentally makes sense, whether it's fundamentally like there's some research backing or some physiological knowledge of a pathway that works for, the math has to math. And that's the filter that allows you to see what's a gimmick versus what's not a gimmick. And that filter, I think, is a huge part of coaching right now. Is you can spend months and months and months trying every single, and tens of thousands of dollars trying every single product out there. Um, but the math has to math on, there's a fundamental pathway of how your body works physiologically. Um,
Right.
or in an engineering standpoint, there's a reason why wider tires have less rolling resistance on certain surfaces at lower pressures. And so it's mixing being an early adopter for a lot of those things that work out fundamentally from an engineering standpoint or a physiological standpoint. And then taking that to an athlete as a coach, or
Right.
just like, implementing some of these things on athletes. It's communicating, bridging that gap. Whitney, for example, doesn't have a physiology background. She's been a professional cyclist for decades. So when Whitney's my ultimate, well, she's the ultimate wife, obviously, but she's the ultimate
I was like, tread
science
lightly.
experiment. Yeah, exactly. She's the the first science experiment for a lot of these things.
Right.
She's the second science experiment, me being the first. And
Right.
so whenever you're coaching an athlete, your athlete's outcome comes first, right? Like you want to see them do well, but you also can't necessarily experiment on them, because especially in gravel, even when you race too much like we do, and you have 30 race days a year and they're all between 100 and 200 miles, you can't afford to necessarily waste a race day on trying something out. So a lot of the practicality of me having an idea that's not my original idea, but it works out fundamentally from a physiological standpoint or an engineering equipment standpoint. And then I'll try it out and sort of see off the bat, if it's stupid or not. And then implementing it in a way that makes sense for whatever that product or nutritional fundamental idea or um, piece of equipment or whatever that looks like in the end.
And so this coaching practice that you've kind of described in pretty good detail, it sounds like you're applying that both to equipment, and I'm just thinking about like the wider tire situation that you mentioned earlier. Like you've known tires forever. You've done like podcasts and blog posts about things in tires that should and shouldn't work, and this is why you should and shouldn't do this thing. But now you have like tire partners that help, hopefully been listening to you saying like why are tires, if not listening to all their people. So you're applying it there, and then you're also applying it to, like you mentioned before, like that high carb scenario as far as physiology. So in essence, like you working as a coach, you're working both ends of the problem, which I'm generalizing here, is basically like how do we get this athlete down the road faster, right?
Exactly. And every event, no matter what it is, if it's a track race, if it's a gravel race, a mountain bike race, every event is its own problem, right? And no one always gets it right 100% of the time. Um, and that's where it gets super interesting and fun, in my opinion, is especially from an elite athlete standpoint, looking at that athlete's abilities, what type of rider they are, their phenotype, their skill level, and then applying what's best for that athlete. So, like me personally, Belgian waffle rides are always kind of a prime example because the courses are terrible juxtapositions with the amount of road to the amount of trails that they have.
Right.
So at certain events, it's easy to look at like Whitney and I and bike sports as sort of a racing team, and we run the same bikes and tires for every race, and that's not true at all.
Right.
I have like a way less talented physiological side than Whitney. We have obviously different workouts. If I'm coaching myself and her, she has different workouts to Cecily. Every athlete has different workouts because they're not the same phenotype, much less the same, power duration curve, et cetera. And so an athlete that, taking Belgian Waffle Ride California, for example, an athlete that has a crazy amount of skill um, can run a slightly narrower tire, and if they can make it to a certain point through the first single track sector, they're going to yield a much faster time at BWR California for the next 40 miles being paved.
Right.
And then a rider that has a different skill level or a slightly less technical skill level on mountain bike trails that might have more road race mentality and more maybe of a time trial phenotype, they're going to run. I'm going to suggest that they run a bigger tire, um, and then get to a better position out of the most technical mountain bike sector that they're not quite as skilled in, and then yield a faster time in the end because they're going to be great in the road tactical sectors. But that's sort of just a fundamental application of an example of coaching that, that's that technology tire equipment side of it. But
Right.
it transcends to workouts as well, of like what your phenotype is, what your power duration curve is, how you're going to perform in these 10 races, how you're going to periodize an entire season, what your A race is going to be, and just kind of down the line, just trying to decide for each athlete to get their best outcome. Not necessarily just like every single race is an A race and you're trying to win every single race throughout the entire season.
True. There's a lot there. You just
Yeah.
took like cutting edge, and then you wrapped back into it like all the other stuff that you've learned and that you've been educated on through the last years, which kind of is what makes, I mean, in my opinion, what makes you good at what you do. In a lot of that case, in a lot of those situations. Couple of minutes left, just some takeaways. So I know a lot of coaches hear these sort of things, and there's that immediate imposter syndrome that happens. I think anyone that says they don't get imposter syndrome at some level is lying. um, if you had to offer advice for other people doing what you're doing or trying to do the best they can for their athletes, and growing this evidence-based practice ability, like what do you think a piece of advice is for?
I think showing up is to the start line is becoming the hardest part of especially gravel racing. Most of my coaching practice and um, currently is gravel racing, especially for my elite athletes. And so everyone is sort of consuming the gravel racing and they're watching live stream and live coverages and all this stuff, and it's like, man, they must train so hard and all this, and they do 100%. And the training is super hard and intensive, and it's, your whole life is built around it. But in reality, we're leaving for Big Sugar um, this evening, and then we come back from Big Sugar, and we have 48 hours at home, and then we fly out to South Africa for gravel burn. And so there's like, where the training for the year is done effectively. But so if you're having imposter syndrome, or you're trying to figure out like what race to go to or where to show up to, just understand that whether you're a paid professional athlete in any of these types of racing, or you're an amateur and you're doing it and balancing fun and time and life balance, just showing up to the start line is the hardest part. And when everyone's on the start line, like that's when you just focus on the rest of the race and all the preparation's been done. So I think get to the start line, like suppress your imposter syndrome, I guess, by staying busy and just like focusing on getting to the start line and being prepared. And that's the hardest part. If you show up to the start line, you've got your gel flask with the right amount of, carbohydrate in it. You've got your bottles. You didn't forget your head unit. Before every single race that I've ever done since I was 12 years old, I get in the car, and before I turn it on and drive out of the driveway, I say helmet, shoes, socks, kit, head unit. The odds of
I
you
still
forgetting
do
your
that.
bike are low. Yeah. um, and then picture where you put them. Don't just like run through the list in your head and be like, I did the list. It's like picture, especially if we're in a van a lot of the time. It's like, where did I put my shoes? Okay, I remember. Um, but then like getting to that start line, like you're already in the top 100%,
Right.
because a lot of people don't make it to the start line, even though they wanted to. Their imposter syndrome took over. Their life circumstance didn't work out to get them to the start line. Like in any of these races, there's just not, even the biggest race, even Unbound, like there's not as many people at the start line as want to do that event. So
Right.
make it to the start line prepared to the best of your ability, and you've effectively already won. I know that this person we're talking about probably has a race result that they're looking for. Um, and if you're following, Little Sugar that just happened, and you see that literally everyone that didn't get on the podium is doing a post about how they are upset at the result that they got. And it's like, you can't, it's unsustainable to be a bike racer like that at any level, amateur or professional. So like
Right.
everyone always wants to win everything. You don't go into the race saying you're going to lose or that you'd be happy with 30th, as realistic as that might be. But like just get to the start line prepared, and then everything generally falls into place.
Right. Well, advice to live by. Thanks a lot, Zach. Appreciate
Never
it.
not made it. Yeah. Thank you.